Hello little wormlings and welcome to the Comfort Corner. Haru here, and today we're going to be reading Winnie the Pooh Chapter 4. With that, let's get started. The old grey donkey, Eeyore, stood by himself in a thistly corner of the forest, his front feet well apart, his head to one side, as he thought about things. Sometimes he thought sadly to himself, "Why?" And sometimes he thought, "Wherefore?" And sometimes, as he thought, "Inasmuch as which?" And sometimes he didn't know quite what to think about at all. So when Winnie the Pooh came stumbling along, Eeyore was very glad to be able to stop thinking for a little in order to say, "How do you do?" in a gloomy manner. "And how are you?" said Winnie the Pooh. Eeyore shook his head from side to side. "Not very how," he said. "I don't seem to have felt at all for quite a long time now." "Dear, dear," said Pooh. "I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at you." So Eeyore stood there gazing sadly at the ground, and Winnie the Pooh walked around him once. "Why, what's happened to your tail?" he said with quite surprise. "What has happened to it?" said Eeyore. "It isn't there." "Are you sure?" "Well, either a tail is there or it isn't. You can't make a mistake about it, and yours isn't there." "Then what is?" "Nothing, Eeyore." "Well, let's have a look," Eeyore said, and he turned slowly around to the place where his tail had been just a little while ago, and then, finding that he couldn't catch it up, he turned around the other way until he came back down to where he was first. He put his head down and looked between his front legs, and at last he said, with a long, sad sigh, "Oh, I believe you're right." "Of course I'm right," said Pooh. "That accounts for a good deal," said Eeyore gloomily. "It explains everything. No wonder." "Oh, you must have left it somewhere," said Winnie the Pooh. "Somebody must have taken it," said Eeyore. "How like them," he added after a long silence. Pooh felt that he ought to say something helpful about it, but he didn't quite know what to say, so he decided to do something helpful instead. "Eeyore," he said solemnly, "I, Winnie the Pooh, will find your tail for you." "Oh, thank you, Pooh," answered Eeyore. "You're a real friend." With that, he said, "Not like some." So Winnie the Pooh went off to find Eeyore's tail. It was a fine spring morning in the forest as he started out on his way. Little soft clouds played happily in a blue sky, skipping from time to time in front of the sun as if they had come out to put it out, and then sliding away suddenly so that the next might have his turn. Through them and between them the sun shone bravely, and a tree which had worn its furs all year round seemed old and doughy now beside the green lace which the beeches had put on so prettily. Through the trees marched the bear, down open slopes of moss and heather, over rocky beds of streams, up steep banks of sandstones, and into the moss again, so at last, tired and hungry, into the 100-acre wood. For it was in the 100-acre wood that Owl lived. "And if anyone knows anything about anything," Bear said to himself, "it's Owl who knows something about something." "Or my name is not Winnie the Pooh," he said, "which it is. So there you are," he added. Owl lived at the Chestnuts, an old-world residence of great charm, which was to grandeur by anyone else's, or so it seemed to Bear, because it had both a knocker and a bell pull. Underneath the knocker there was a notice which said, "Please ring if answer is required," which was to say, "Please ring if an answer is required." And underneath the bell pull there was a notice which said, "Please chunk if answer is not required," which was to say, "Please knock if an answer is not required." These notices had been written by Christopher Robin, who was the only one in the forest who could spell. For Owl, wise though he was in many ways, able to read and write and spell his own name as W-O-L, he had somehow went to pieces over delicate words like measles and buttered toast. Winnie the Pooh read the two notices very carefully, first from left to right, and afterwards in right to left, in case he had missed some of it. Then, to make quite sure, he knocked and pulled the knocker, and then he pulled and pulled on the bell rope, and called out in a very loud voice, "Owl, I require an answer. It is Bear speaking." And the door opened, and Owl peeked his head out. "Hello, Pooh. How are things?" "Terrible and sad," said Pooh, "because Eeyore, who is a friend of mine, has lost his tail and he's moping about. So could you very kindly tell me how to find it for him?" "Well," said Owl, "the customary procedure in such cases is as follows." "What does crust-o-money proceed cake mean?" said Pooh. "For I am a bear of very little brain, and long words do bother me." "It means the thing to do." "As long as it means that, I don't mind," Pooh said humbly. "The thing to do is as follows. First issue a reward, then—" "Just a moment," said Pooh, holding up his paw. "What do we do to this, you were saying you sneezed just as you were going to tell me?" "I didn't sneeze," said Owl. "Yes, you did, Owl." "Excuse me, Pooh, I didn't. You see, I can't sneeze without knowing it." "Well, you can't know it without something having been sneezed." "What I said was, first issue a reward." "Ah, you're doing it again," Pooh said sadly. "A reward," Owl said very loudly. "We write a notice to say that we will give a large something to anyone who finds Eeyore's tail." "Oh, I see," said Pooh, nodding his head. "Talking about large somethings," he went on dreamily, "I generally have a small something about now, about this time in the morning." He looked wistfully at the cupboard in the corner of Owl's parlor. "Just a mouthful of condensed milk or whatnot, perhaps with a lick of honey." "Well then," Owl said, "we write out this notice and we'll put it up all over the forest." "A lick of honey," murmured the bear to himself. Or not, as the case may be," and he gave a deep sigh, and tried very hard to listen to what Owl was saying. But Owl went on, using longer and longer words, until at last he came back to where he started, and explained that the person to write out this notice was going to have to be Christopher Robin. "It was he who wrote the ones on my front door for me. Did you see them, Pooh?" For some time now Pooh had been saying yes and no in turn, with his eyes shut to all that Owl was saying, and having said yes, yes the last time, he said no, not at all now, without really thinking about what Owl was talking about. "You didn't see them?" said Owl, a little surprised. Come, let's go look at them now." So they went outside, and Pooh looked at the knocker and the notice below it, and he looked up at the bell rope and the notice below it, and then once more he looked at the bell rope, and he felt like he had seen something there before, somewhere else, sometime before. "Handsome bell rope, isn't it?" said Owl. Pooh nodded. "It reminds me of something," he said, "but I can't think what." Where did you get it? I just came across it in the forest. It was hanging over a bush, and I thought at first somebody lived there, so I rang it. And nothing happened, and then I rang it again very loudly, and it came off in my hand. As nobody seemed to want it, I took it home. Owl, Pooh said solemnly, you made a mistake. Somebody did want it. Who? Eeyore, my dear friend Eeyore. He was fond of it. Fond of it? Attached to it, even, you could say, Winnie the Pooh said sadly. So, with these words, he unhooked it and carried it back to Eeyore, and when Christopher Robin had nailed it on just right into its place again, Eeyore frisked about the forest, waving his tail so happily that Winnie the Pooh came over all funny and had to hurry home for a little snack of something to sustain him. And wiping his mouth half an hour afterwards, he sang to himself proudly, Who found the tail? I said Pooh, 2:45. Only it was 11:15 really. I found the tail. End of chapter 4. Well, isn't that quite silly? Who would have thought that Mr. Owl would have found Eeyore's tail and took it to use as his bell ringer? Oh, what the story indeed. Thank you all so much for coming by, and I hope to see you back again for chapter 5 next time. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.